All right, music fans, welcome back to the Real Music Observer. It is Dave. I am observing real music in real time for real people just like you right there. And me right here. So, I've got a theory. Usually I get in trouble when I start to posit theories about certain relationships, especially when it comes to Journey. But here's the statement I'm going to make. There's a reason that Steve Perry fired both Ross Valory and Steve Smith prior to the Raised on Radio album and tour. It was said that Perry was looking for a certain sound, and there's really plenty of evidence to suggest that Perry was trying to move the band in a more R&B direction. And the results you can kind of hear on Raised on Radio. It definitely has a more pop feel, a more R&B feel to it. Neil Schon is in there and he's trying to keep the band a rock band, and Jonathan Cain has plenty of work to do because the keyboards are, they're very robust, and it's a great album. It's a different sounding album. It's a huge departure, excuse the pun, from the Frontiers album, which is pure arena rock, whereas the stuff on Raised was much more polished, much more adult contemporary sounding in a lot of ways. It still had a lot of the energy and spunk for Top 40, but definitely a more adult sounding record. And Perry ends up firing both Valory and Steve Smith. Now, Steve Smith, the consummate drummer, if you watch him on Behind the Music, says something to the effect that, couldn't imagine being fired. I take pride in my drumming and so forth, and it was a shock. Ross Valory, who, let's be honest, Ross is a good bass player. He's a pedestrian bass player. In other words, he is average to slightly above average on bass. He's not a guy that you say, wow, he's Chris Squire. He's been in the band. He's had a good fortune to be there at the beginning for the most part, and then he's only been away from the band because of Perry. Now, Perry's instincts, I think, also have to do with personalities. This is where I get into theory. I believe Ross Valory at this stage, I might agree with Neil Schon on this point, that Ross Valory isn't helping other than wanting to keep the brand the way it is. He's there. He knows he's got a good gig. He's got a good paycheck. And I think that's about all for Ross. I mean, he's not said or done much over the years that's controversial. The weirdest thing I've seen him do is pretend he's a drug addict on the Midnight Special broadcast from way back in, I think, 78 or 77, 78, 79. I don't know. You can go look that up on YouTube. It's comical, but it's also a little bit weird and embarrassing. Maybe it was something they put him up to doing, but he seemed to take on the role very naturally. And as far as his musical chops, again, and how this relates to personalities, I think that Ross knows that he's not Chris Squire, and he's there because he's been in Journey, and he's part of Journey, and people tend to like him because of that reason. Steve Smith, I think, is probably there, and look, Ross Valory also had lots of financial problems, and he reveals those financial problems in the documentary, pretty much bankrupt and so forth. So here's my theory. It looks like Ross and Steve Smith are really in this for a paycheck. Look, Steve Smith is a completely different drummer than Deen Castronovo. And I know Deen got into a lot of trouble a few years back. He's doing a great job these days, and it's good to see him kind of redeemed and back on track. But I think Deen played arena rock style music. And Deen seems to really enjoy being behind that drum kit. Deen can also sing, which takes a little bit of the pressure off of the lead vocalist, whoever it is. If it's Arnell, when it was Steve Argeri, I think even Steve Perry, if he had hung around long enough, he might have taken a hard look at Deen Castronovo. And let's give credit where credit is due. I know this is going to be tough for some of you to stomach, but Neil Schon was the guy who brought Castronovo into the band. Of course, they were playing together way back in Bad English, and from what I understand, Neil Schon saw Deen playing for Tony McAlpine, if that's correct. Someone might want to verify that, but in any event, stole him, brought him into Bad English, and then, the relationship has been there ever since. Now, my hunch is that Deen brings a lot of intensity, a lot of energy back into Journey if he were to return to the band. Don't know if he wants to get involved in this right now because of all of the tension and all the things going on. Steve Smith, I think, is there primarily for a paycheck. Okay? Ross Valory, the same. I don't think Ross is going anywhere. I think he'll retire. It's kind of like you reach the age of retirement, and if you're going anywhere, you're just going into retirement. You're going to stay with your company right until the end. But maybe Perry was looking at both Steve Smith as a little bit of a jazz drummer snob, somebody who was a little bit set in his ways, wasn't really teachable, in the sense that Perry wanted him to do something and his style just didn't permit it. Ross Valory may have been mailing it in for so long and really wasn't giving Perry that little jolt of R&B that Perry wanted for that album, and that relates to things now. I mean, these guys are creatively kind of stagnant. Steve Smith ran after this tour back to his jazz stuff. Everybody else took a little break, did some contemplating. Arnell is on tour now. John Cain's got a solo album that's out, was supposed to tour and isn't. But bottom line here is Steve Perry, again, I think has good instincts as somebody who understood maybe both the personalities and sort of the musical boxes these guys were in. And even now, where Journey's at, if you look at their last recorded album, Eclipse, that was a sort of a rock album, a guitar album. Neil Schon really put his thumbprints on that album, and to mixed results, quite honestly. I think the material could have been better. I think you needed more time to create those songs, and maybe you could have flushed more of melodic tendencies into those songs. You could have brought, more melodic sound to those tunes. But you got guys, I think, who are a little complacent, who are in the group, at least two of them. And I think until that really changes, you may have this tension between Cain and Schon, but those guys are really creative guys, whether you like either of them or not, whether you like their wives or not, whatever the circumstance is. I think Cain and Schon are the creative forces in the group. Arnell is there to sing, and he knows his role. Ross is there to play bass, and Steve Smith, I think, is there for a paycheck, and it's too bad. I'd like to see Journey a more passionate outfit, and I think bringing Dino back would be an awesome thing for the band and for Deen. I don't know if Deen wants it, like I say, but that's my theory. You guys can debate amongst yourselves, but I think Steve Perry was right in hindsight to fire both Valory and Smith back in the day, even though later on that just looked like egotistical craziness. Perry has since said he wouldn't have done it if he had to do it all over again, but they weren't giving him the sound he was looking for. So I think it's word to the wise for now. We'll talk later. That's it for this video. Have a great day.